Welcome to the Film Geezers podcast. Hello and welcome to the Film Geezers podcast. I'm Robbo, I'm here with Cheeto.
Hello.
And today we're going to be talking about Sir Sean Connery. We're going to do a few of these podcasts where we focus on a particular actor or director and kind of mix it up with our usual content. So to start off with, I'll just give a little bit brief background of his early life. So Sean Connery was born Thomas Connery in Edinburgh, Scotland on the 25th of August 1930. His mother was a cleaning woman. His father was a factory worker and lorry driver, so he came from fairly humble background. Two of his paternal great-grandparents actually emigrated to Scotland from Ireland, so he has got some Irish ancestry as well. He left school at 14 and got a job working for the co-op as a milkman, delivering milk. In 1946, at the age of 16, he joined the Royal Navy, did his basic training in Portsmouth and joined then HMS Formidable as an able seaman. He was actually discharged at the age of 19 on medical grounds because of duodenal ulcers. He then returned to the co-op and then he worked, amongst other things, as a lorry driver, a lifeguard, a labourer, an artist model for the Edinburgh College of Art. And then at the age of 18, he began bodybuilding. And although his official website states he was third in the 1950 Mr. Universe contest, most sources place him in the 1953 competition, either third in the junior class or failing to place in the tallman class. He was a keen footballer, having played for Bonnyrigg Rose in his younger days. And while he was on tour in South Pacific, he played in a football match against a local team that Matt Busby, manager of Manchester United, happened to be scouting. And according to reports, Busby was impressed with his physical prowess and offered him a contract worth £25 a week. He said he was tempted to accept, but he realised that, by the age of 30, a footballer's career is over. And at that time, he was already 23, so he decided to become an actor instead.
In 1953, Connery found himself in London attending a bodybuilding competition. A fellow muscle man mentioned that the King's Theatre was holding open auditions for a production of Rodgers and Hammerstein's South Pacific. Connery went along and he was initially placed in the chorus and he worked his way up to understudy of the lead. And then he was a natural talent, and over the next decade, Connery picked up parts in many diverse films, from thriller time lock and adventure epic Tarzan's Greatest Adventure to 1961 comedy caper on the fiddle.
Yeah, and then his next film after that was a small part in the epic war film The Longest Day, based on the Normandy landings, where he played an Irishman, Private Flanagan. And then the next film after that was obviously his big break.
In Dr. No. While Connery was kind of finding his feet in the acting world, producers Harry Saltzman and Albert R. Cubby Broccoli were busy wrangling a man of their own, and that man's name was, of course, James Bond. And they set out there's basically this huge mission to set out to find who to play the super spy. And their first choice was Cary Grant. He was chosen, actually given the part right then and there. The contract was written up and all but signed, so they were ready to start filming with him. The Hollywood leading man revealed he would only make one film, because I think he was 58, he must have been at the time, and he didn't want to create a whole series, so they were forced to part ways at that, because they were like, we want to make a full series, And other names are kicked around, including Patrick McGowan of The Prisoner fame and David Niven, who I think was also 50 years old at the time. The director, Terence Young, was pushing for Shakespearean actor Richard Johnson to take the role. And this shocked me, this bit. Even Roger Moore, of course, who was a future 007, was considered at this time. But Broccoli considered him too young and perhaps a shade too pretty. And this is the thing. The writer wanted something different, Ian Fleming. The director wanted something different. The producers wanted something different. So you could see why there was all this trouble trying to cast James Bond. Fleming himself weighed in. An actor named Richard Todd was the author's choice. The performer embodied Wing Commander Guy Gibson and the Dam Busters. Saltzman and Broccoli disagreed once again. Go back.
Yeah, Richard Todd fairly short, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was, and I don't think he fit really the image of what Saltzman and Broccoli had. Like I said, an agreement couldn't be reached, and the search was started yet again. And around this time, the Daily Express, which is a newspaper here in the UK, decided to launch a contest, find James Bond, and so along came Connery, at least a decade younger than most of his serious candidates. He was a rank outsider for the part. Nevertheless, Broccoli and Saltzman agreed to meet the actor for lunch. Now, when they met for lunch, he didn't make the best first impression. Connery appeared at the restaurant looking dishevelled, with Broccoli in particular recalling that he was wearing unimpressive clothes and looked unkempt. But Dana Broccoli, Cubby's wife, had persuaded her husband to give Connery a chance, and so there they were across the table from the man who would be Bond. And that's literally, it was over one dinner that they decided that Sean Connery was going to be James Bond in Dr. No. So to me it's really fascinating how they had this huge, like I said, Daily Express is a national newspaper here. And it was this whole UK-wide search to find James Bond. You just don't get that anymore, do you? You get a casting director, they choose their leading man, but that's really fascinating. So
what I read was that what Broccoli liked about Sean Connery was the fact, although he was a big man, he was 6'2", amateur bodybuilder, the way that he moved in a very graceful way.
Yeah.
And then obviously his wife confirmed that he had that sex appeal as well.
Yeah, well, it was actually as he was walking to the table that they decided that. So, like I said, it's just fascinating that.
Fleming didn't like him initially, did he? Because he felt he was kind of too rough to play it. Because he obviously James Bond, he's suave, sophisticated, educated.
Well, he's based on Christopher Lee, isn't he? So that type of.
And I think Terence Young, the director, kind of took Connery under his wing and sort of taught him those things, took him out to dinner, and gave him these almost like
lessons.
Yeah, and after Fleming saw Dr. No, he realised that Sean Connery was James Bond, and actually in subsequent books wrote James Bond a Scottish heritage as well, which is
how much of an impact he's had on.
Exactly, yeah. So then from that, he went on to make 2 more Bond films, didn't he? From Russia with Love and Goldfinger. Yep. And obviously were massive hits. But I think, like with most actors, he was initially reluctant to sign on for a series because of that typecasting. Yeah. And so even whilst making Bond, he wanted to go and do other films. And I think Eon offered him other films, but he turned them down. And they asked him, what do you want to do then? What film do you want to make? He says, well, I want to work with Hitchcock.
Yeah.
And they set it up for him to actually make the film Marnie with Alfred Hitchcock and with starring Tippi Hedren.
Because wasn't it obviously, of course, when you get a huge part like James Bond, you're the most wanted man, basically. Yeah. And it was I read, actually, it was Hitchcock and all these other great directors were actually wanting, contacted him. They actually wanted him to join their movies. So,
so the film Marnie, it's kind of a bit of a dark film because it's Tippi Hedren is she plays a thief with psychological problems, and Connery's character blackmails her into marrying him, and there's a scene in which he actually rapes her. Which is, I've never seen that in a Hitchcock film.
Jesus, yeah.
And before he made it, he was worried that it was going to be another spy thriller like North by Northwest. So he insisted on reading the script. And Hitchcock said to him, he said even Cary Grant never asked to read the script. He says, "Well, I'm not Cary Grant. I'm Sean Connery." But I think that film was fairly successful, and it proved again that he could do other things other than James Bond. And again, the following year, he made one of your particular favourites, The Hill, which I think is one of 5 films that he actually made with Sidney Lumet.
Yeah.
Or Lumet, sorry.
He directs it, and it's set in an army prison in North Africa at the end of the Second World War. And it's got a huge cast. It stars Sean Connery, Harry Andrews, Ian Bannon, Ozzie Davis, Ian Hendry, Alfred Lynch, Roy Kinnear, and Michael Redgrave. And the plot is 5 British soldiers are sent to a detention camp in the Libyan desert, including Sergeant Major Roberts, played by Connery, whose conviction for this sort of an officer is shrouded in mystery. As punishment, the vicious Staff Sergeant Williams, Henry, orders the prisoners to continuously climb a man-made hill in the scorching desert heat. Though his colleague, Staff Sergeant Harris, Ian Bannon, sympathises with the new detainees, he can only watch as Williams goes to sadistic extremes. But yeah, like I said, it's one of my favourites, and it's refreshing to see. Don't get me wrong, I love Connery as Bond, but it's refreshing to see him in different roles as well, especially in a war film.
Yeah, and again, it went to prove that he could play more dramatic parts. And although it didn't do very well commercially, it did do wonders for his career.
And it's now regarded as a brilliant film now, isn't it? So
it is, yeah. After that, he went on to make another Bond film, which I think is your favourite, Thunderball?
Yeah, Thunderball.
Yeah.
And this was, I believe, the third and last film by Terence Young, I believe.
Right.
And yes, it's the fourth in the James Bond series, produced by Eon Productions, and is an adaptation of the 1961 novel The Same Name by Ian Fleming, and it follows Bond's mission to find 2 NATO atomic bombs stolen by Spectre, which holds the world for ransom of £100 million in diamonds under its threat to destroy an unspecified metropolis in either the United Kingdom or the United States. The search leads Bond to the Bahamas, where he encounters Emilio Largo, the car-playing eye patch-wearing Spectre No. 2, backed by CIA agent Felix Leitner, and Largo's mistress, Domino Duval. Bond's search culminates in an underwater battle with Largo's henchmen. And yeah, it is a favourite of mine. I know that can be quite controversial, but as someone who obviously didn't live through the Bond movies, in particular, I just like this one. I don't know why. Yeah. And
there was some controversy about this film because it was originally meant to be the first.
Yeah,
Bond
meant to
film,
be the first one. Yeah,
and it then was the centre of legal disputes that began in 1961, and what happened was former Ian Fleming collaborators Kevin McClory and Jack Whittingham sued Fleming shortly after the 1961 publication of the Thunderball novel, claiming he based it on their screenplay that they'd written earlier. The lawsuit settled out of court, but McClory retained certain screen rights to the novel's story, plot and characters, which would go on to have an impact later on. In 1967, he made what was intended to be his final Bond film, You Only Live Twice, and he would be passing on the mantle to George Lazenby.
He was an Australian, I believe, wasn't he? Yeah.
And his next film after that was actually his only Western that he ever made, and it was called Chalico, and it was one of those European Westerns. Like everybody, after the success of like Sergio Leone's Fistful of Dollars, everyone was making these kind of European Westerns.
It's a British-German production, isn't it?
I mean, it had Brigitte Bardot in it, as well as Jack Hawkins, Honor Blackman, who actually was his co-star in Goldfinger. But again, it wasn't particularly well received, and it lost money at the box office. After that, he would make his next film for Sidney Lumet called The Anderson Tapes. And this is kind of a warning, I guess, for surveillance. He plays a safecracker, is released from prison. He renews his relationship with his old girlfriend. She lives in an upper-class apartment block in Manhattan. And so he decides that almost instantly he's going to put a team together to rob the whole apartment block. But little does he know is that everything he's doing is under surveillance. So it's cameras, bugs, tracking devices. And so everything they're doing is being watched. And in the end, as soon as they finish the robbery, they're essentially captured. And I guess that's a warning for a future. Now we live in a world where everything's kind of monitored. CCTV, internet.
You're never not on a camera.
Exactly. So, and after that, then although actually, On Her Majesty's Secret Service is considered one of the better Bond films.
Yeah, it's always near the top.
But they wouldn't really accept George Lazenby as Bond. I don't think.
Is that due to just because he's Australian?
I don't know. Just maybe because he's maybe not Sean Connery.
Yeah. Big shoes to fill.
So he returned to the Bond franchise for a record $1.25 million, which I worked out yesterday is worth $8 million in today's, which was actually 17% of their budget.
Oh my God.
And they paid him so much that they had to compromise in other areas of the film, so like the special effects.
Yeah.
And that. The film, as the title suggests, is all about diamonds and how Spectre are stockpiling diamonds. They initially think it's to depress the price of them, but it actually turns out that they're building a laser satellite using the diamonds, which they're going to destroy nuclear weapons in China, the Soviet Union, and the United States. And then he's going to hold an auction for nuclear supremacy. I mean, it earned back its $7.2 million budget and then some, making $116 million, which means that, obviously, Sean Connery as Bond is
yeah, I mean,
popular.
Just to put it into words, it was the #1 film in the world for 7 straight weeks. It just goes to show Connery's star power. Yeah.
But then this kind of leads into a period when, Connery's career was on the downward spiral. He really was struggling to get parts. He worked with Sidney Lumet again in another film called The Offence. It's a British crime neo-noir drama film based on a stage play. And Connery plays a detective who essentially he's questioning a suspected child molester played by Ian Bannon. And he beats him so much that he later dies in hospital. So it's quite it's set in it's a one scene. It's set in an interrogation room most of the actual film. So it's kind of that, because Sidney Lumet did obviously 12 Angry Men. So it's that kind of pressure cooker type film. And then he made a weird film, the 1974 science fantasy film called Zardoz. And that's written and directed by John Borman. And Borman was trying to make a dramatization of The Lord of the Rings, but just couldn't get it off the ground. And he'd originally cast Burt Reynolds in this role, but he pulled out due to illness. And Sean Connery, because obviously he's trying to rebuild his career, really signed on. And that's why Borman said that they managed to get him for $200,000.
Oh my God! Yeah.
And it's a really weird film. It's set in the future. Connery spends most of the film running around in a mankini. And it's become one of those sort of cult classics, but I wouldn't say it's one of his best films. And then 1974, again, he makes another Sidney Lumet film. Murder on the Orient Express, which is based on the Agatha Christie novel. Now, Lumet cast Connery first because he thought that because Connery at the time was kind of the biggest star in the world, that if you cast Connery first, the other actors would sign on. And when you look at the cast, you've got Lauren Bacall, Ingrid Bergman, John Gielgud, Vanessa Redgrave, Michael York, Jacqueline Bisset, Anthony Perkins, Richard Widmark, and obviously Albert Finney as Poirot. It's a small part. It's an ensemble cast. He plays, again, a British military officer. His next film would be the 1975 epic adventure war film, The Wind and the Lion, which was written and directed by John Milius. And it starred Connery with Candice Bergen and John Huston. And it was set in 1904. Connery plays a Moroccan leader who kidnaps an American woman and her children for ransom, and it's like a political kind of film. But interestingly, it's co-starred John Huston, who actually would direct his next film, which he said was his favourite part, which was The Man Who Would Be King, based on a Rudyard Kipling short story. Like I say, it was adapted and directed by John Huston, and it would star Sean Connery alongside his friend Michael Caine. I think they actually met back in 1954, and they were friends ever since. And it also stars Christopher Plummer as Kipling. It's set in the late 19th century in British India, and Connery and Michael Caine star as two ex-soldiers who get into trouble in India and are told that if they get into any more trouble, they're going to be deported. So they decide to go off to Kafiristan, which is like a far-off country, to see if they can seek their fortune. And Kafiristan split up into like tribes, and each tribe's got a leader. And so what they do is the first leader they come across, they help him lead them into battle against his rival tribe and beat them. And so they do this a few times, and then in one of the battles, Connery gets shot by an arrow, but it sticks in his leather belt, and he just pulls it out. And they see him do this, and they think that he's a god then. And so they take him and Michael Caine to the capital, and they believe that he's the reincarnation of Alexander the Great. And they show him Alexander's treasure, so there's gold and diamonds and other precious stones. And Michael Caine's character wants to leave, but he's getting used to being a god. And he decides to take a wife. And the superstition is that if a mortal woman was to sleep with a god, she would burst into flames. So on their wedding day, she's having to be drugged to marry him. And something goes wrong, and she ends up biting him, and he bleeds, and that's when they realise he's not a god. So it's one of those kind of old style boys' own adventure type films. So it's well worth watching. And like I said, he considered it one of his favourite parts. 1976, he'd play Robin Hood in Robin and Marian, and this is like an odd film because it shows Robin and Marian as older people. He's been off fighting in the Crusades for years. He comes back only to find Marian is now a nun. So yeah, it's one of those films that gives you like a little bit of an insight into when characters get older. His next film was the 1977 epic war film, A Bridge Too Far, and it's an ensemble cast, and it's about Operation Market Garden during the Second World War, which was the biggest Allied airdrop, parachute drop in history. And he plays Major General Roy Urquhart. It's a good film, but like I say, it's an ensemble cast, and it does feature some big names. It's directed by Richard Attenborough, and you've got like Dirk Bogarde, James Caan, Michael Caine, Edward Fox, Elliot Gould, Gene Hackman, Anthony Hopkins, Hardy Kruger, Laurence Olivier, Ryan O'Neill, Robert Redford. And again, it was in that period when he's still trying to rebuild his career, really. The next film he made was the 1979 heist film, really, called The First Great Train Robbery, and it's written and directed by Michael Crichton. It stars Sean Connery, Donald Sutherland, and Leslie Ann Down. And it is, like I say, it's almost like a heist film in the mould of Ocean's 11. It's set during the Crimean War, and the plan is that this group of thieves led by Sean Connery, they're going to steal gold that's heading to the Crimean War to pay the payroll for the soldiers in the Crimean War, and they plan to steal it from a moving train. So again, it's a good film, but again, it's during that period when he was still really trying to rebuild his career. Next film, I guess, would be Outland, which I really like this film. It's a science fiction thriller, and he plays a federal marshal, and he's assigned to a tour duty on a moon, I think it's Io, a moon of Jupiter, and he's there to investigate drugs and drug smuggling, because the miners there are being given stimulants, so they actually work harder and more productive. And it's got a very... it's been described as a space western, but it's got a very alien feel to it and the style of the film. Again, it's probably not one of his most well-known films, but I really did like it. The next film of his was the same year, was the fantasy adventure Time Bandits, which was written, produced and directed by Terry Gilliam, and Sean Connery stars as King Agamemnon. And actually, in the script, he was never actually meant to be in the film. In the script, it just says King Agamemnon takes off his helmet, revealing Sean Connery or somebody equally as good but cheaper. And somehow the script got to him and he agreed to do it. But, Time Bandits is a good film.
Yeah, it's a classic,
yeah,
mate. Yeah,
definitely. He'd go on to actually narrate the 1982 official FIFA World Cup film. And then I guess his next sort of big film would be Never Say Never Again in 1983, where he would reprise his role with James Bond, but in a non-Eon film.
it was a Talia film, wasn't it?
And this goes back to Thunderball, because Kevin McClory held, because of the legal battle with Ian Fleming over rights, Kevin McClory actually retained some of the rights to the Thunderball storyline. So they essentially, it was Thunderball, but under a different name. And that was directly released opposite, I think, Octopussy as well, which is a Roger Moore film.
So yeah, it's quite a simple plot, and it obviously he's older, and the plot revolves around the fact that he's older, and it basically is like an aging James Bond makes an uncharacteristic mistake during a routine training mission, leading M, played by Edward Fox, to believe that the legendary British intelligence spy is now past his prime, and M indefinitely suspends Bond from active duty. However, when Spectre member Fatima Bush and her fellow terrorists successfully steal 2 nuclear missiles from the US military, M must reinstate Bond as he is the only agent who can beat Spectre at their own game of espionage. And quite controversially, this is actually my favourite James Bond film, even though it's not an Eon Productions. It's a Talia film, but it's just something about it, and I like the fact that it explores different themes, as in like it is an aging Bond, and you can see that with his character and the way the story's written, and it's almost like a him finding himself again, because like I said, he makes a mistake, and it's about him redeeming that, and it's obviously directed by Irvin Kershner, so it's going to be of high quality, so yeah, it's definitely my favourite James Bond film.
Yeah, and this would kind of mark a switch in kind of Connery's career, because his next film would be 1986's Highlander, and he goes from kind of being the leading man to being more of the mentor, sort of father figure. In Highlander, he plays a character called Juan Sanchez Villalobos Ramirez, who's supposedly a swordsman from Spain, but he's actually turns out to be from Egypt, and he is one of the immortals, and he seeks out Conor McLeod, played by Christopher Lambert, and basically teaches him about sword fighting, about where he's from and what they are essentially. And I think the reason he did this was he got to shoot it in the Scottish Highlands. I think he only spent a week actually on the film. And this is the first time probably since James Bond that he appeared in a sequel, which was Highlander 2 in 1991. After that, he made a film called The Name of the Rose, which was a European co-production. And it's an odd storyline. He plays a Franciscan friar, and he's kind of investigating a murder in medieval Europe. He also starred Christian Slater as his apprentice. So again, he's playing that mentor figure, older figure. And I thought it was a decent film. Again, it was a departure from anything he'd really done before, and just did illustrate his acting ability. And I think 1987 was the Untouchables. That was the film that really changed his career.
Yeah, the axis of his career. Yes.
Again, he plays the mentor to Kevin Costner. It's set during Prohibition Chicago. Al Capone is gangster. He's bootlegging alcohol. No one really wants to stop him. Kevin Costner plays Elliot Ness, Treasury officer, comes to Chicago. It's full of corruption. Nobody really wants him there. No one wants to help him. And then he comes across Sean Connery, an aging police officer. And then they build this team called the Untouchables. And they're called that because they can't be bribed or got to. And for his performance in this, he won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, and that really did then kick his career on into probably the sort of second phase of his career.
I mean, in my opinion, it's one of the most legendary supporting actor roles ever, and what it did for his career, like he was doing these like little independent like European films, and then it really made. I can't tell you. Like, take this as it is, it made him the most wanted actor in the world. And after that, he was appearing in all these huge blockbusters, and he seemed to appear in a film every single year that was of note, you know, and he really was the most wanted actor in the world. He was the biggest movie star in the world after this.
Yeah, and his next film was the 1988 film The Presidio, which was a crime drama. It starred him, Mark Harmon, and he's military police, isn't he? And he's having to work with San Francisco detective Mark Harmon to investigate the murder of another military police officer.
It's another one where, because obviously Mark Harmon is the young detective, while Sean Connery is he's the colonel of the military police, isn't he? And it's almost once again it's that
sort of mentor training relationship.
Role, sort of, But what I love about this film is it's a decently written plot, but I like the chemistry that the two have on screen together.
Because Mark Harmon was formerly a military police officer, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Under
he's like a disgrace.
Under Sean Connery's command.
Yeah, and they don't like each other.
There,
but then as it goes on, they each have a really good story arc, and they begin to work together, and it's a really good film.
Yeah, and that leads on to probably one of my favourite Sean Connery films is Indiana Jones: The Last Crusade, and again, he's playing that father figure to the legendary Indiana Jones, and I think Spielberg said that they couldn't think of anybody who could actually play this part other than James Bond.
Because how do you play Henry Jones Sr., you know? And I think an actor like Sean Connery, like Robbo was saying, only him with his star power and the way he is could fit that role.
But the thing is, again, it's a different role. He's not an action hero.
No.
He's very much an academic. He's a bookworm. He gets caught up on this Nazi plot, and then goes off on an adventure with his son, who he's been estranged from since he was a teenager. In the film, they say they haven't spoken much over 20 years, and it's a chance for them to reconnect, which they do. And again, it's a really good film, and I think it's probably my second favourite Indiana Jones film. He was offered the opportunity to return in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, but he'd already retired by that point, and I don't think he liked the storyline, and he said he was actually enjoying retirement too much to do that. But I think the chemistry between Harrison Ford and Sean Connery is brilliant. What we'll say is that the list that we're going through, filmography, it's not the exhaustive list. We're just kind of picking out films here and there.
Films with note.
Really. And the next one is the 1990 Hunt for Red October, which is the first Jack Ryan film. It's directed by John McTiernan, and it's adapted from the Tom Clancy novel. And it's set in the Cold War era. And Connery plays Marco Ramius. He's a submarine commander, and he's been given command of this submarine, which has got silent capabilities, and he realises this is a first strike submarine, and so he decides with the rest of his crew that he's going to defect, and so he has to work with Alec Baldwin, who plays Jack Ryan, to come up with a plan to allow him to defect and for the Americans to take the submarine without the Russians knowing. So it's a
brilliant.
It's a really good film, and I think it is probably one of my favourite Jack Ryan films.
Well, it's odd because Jack Ryan is a huge name in cinema, and it is a Jack Ryan film, but you remember this as a Connery film, though, don't you?
Yeah, you do. Really.
Not necessarily a Jack Ryan film.
But again, is Sean Connery playing a Russian with a Scottish accent.
Yeah.
Because we were talking earlier, Cheeto and I. He would never. He wasn't a classically trained actor. He wasn't trained. Most actors, when they're classically trained, they go to RADA or whatever. The first thing they do is they will be trained to lose their accent. But then I can't think of many actors today that actually do different accents.
Yeah.
Like we're saying, Harrison Ford doesn't really do it. Robert De Niro doesn't do it. And I think it'd be really distracting if Sean Connery was trying to do a different accent. He briefly toyed with an Irish accent in The Untouchables, which disappeared throughout the film.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a bit weird. And again, he's playing. He's not the main character. He obviously Alec Baldwin is the hero, and he's playing again that older, wiser mentor type figure. He wasn't actually meant to be in the film. Originally, Klaus Maria Brandauer was cast, but had to pull out 2 weeks into filming. So producers faxed the script to Sean Connery. He first declined because he said it was implausible. But what happened was the first page was missed off the script when they faxed it to him, and it didn't explain that it was set in the 80s in the Cold War. And so when they explained that to him, he did the film. And again, another good film, another strong performance. I guess the next film now is he had a brief cameo in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, right at the end of the film, when Robin Hood, played by Kevin Costner, is getting married to Maid Marian. He plays Richard the Lionheart, who's just come back from the Crusades, and I think he's probably got a 3-minute cameo in that. And I think he got paid a lot of money. I think about $1 million for 3 minutes work, which
mental,
isn't
isn't it?
Bad, yeah. But that just shows his kind of pulling power in that.
Yeah.
1992, he only made one film. It's called Medicine Man, which is, again, it's a weird film. It was directed by John McTiernan, who's known for action, but it's more of an arty kind of film. He plays this biochemist who has discovered, he's living in the Amazon rainforest, discovers a cure for cancer. That's about much you can say, really. It was critically panned, particularly the performance of Lorraine Bracco. She, I think, was nominated for a Golden Raspberry for her performance. So even though it wasn't one of his greatest films, didn't make any money, it's just worth noting. His next film was the 1993 Rising Sun, directed by Philip Kaufman, and it's based on Michael Crichton's novel of the same name. And I think this is one of your particular favourites, isn't it, Cheeto?
Yeah, once again, it's another mentor role where, and you could say it's another, like, one of those buddy cop movies, but it's, to me, it's so much more than that, because, like, Wesley Snipes is the like younger novice cop, who is he doesn't think things through, he just goes with his heart, and where once again Sean Connery is that mentor. He's the older, wiser detective, you know.
It's about a murder in a Japanese company headquarters, isn't it? And Wesley Snipes is like the new liaison officer for the police. You've got Harvey Keitel, who's kind of the old, embittered, racist police officer. And then you've got almost Sean Connery's playing John Connor, this almost like a mythical kind of character. He's well versed in Japanese culture, and he kind of guides the audience and Wesley Snipes through the whole culture and everything.
But I like it because it turns the film on its head when you realise that a cover-up may be happening, you know.
And they feel that because he's too close to the Japanese, that he might be involved in it as well. So
they're working together, but they're like they butt heads as well. And I just think it brings a different dynamic to the film.
And again, it was a blockbuster. It made over $60 million. So again, that's him really at the top of his game again. Yeah, I think. I don't think without him it would have been the same film.
No, of course not.
So. It didn't really make. He made a couple of films in between that weren't that great. One of the films worth mentioning is First Night, which was in 1995. It's a medieval film based on the Arthurian legend. And I think he wanted it to, starred Richard Gere as Lancelot. And I think he wanted it to be kind of a marquee sort of film, and it didn't really live up to his expectations. So I think he was a little bit disappointed in that film. The next one was the 96 animated. Oh, it's not animated. It's a action adventure fantasy, Dragonheart, and he just provides the voice of the main dragon, Draco. Again, it's just worth mentioning. And then the next film that he did that was massive was 1996 is The Rock.
Oh, that's a favourite of ours, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And again, he's playing
John Patrick Mason.
Yeah, not really a mentor. Well, he's kind of a mentor, but he's that older.
He's the older, wiser,
character.
more experienced.
The sort of story is almost an improbable one. A group of U.S. Marines under Ed Harris, they storm Alcatraz and they take the tourists hostage. And this is all about recognition for some of their fallen comrades in wars that they haven't been recognised or compensated for. So they want to get paid 100 million?
Yeah, 100 million.
But they have this VX gas, which is a toxic nerve gas that they threaten to shoot into San Francisco. And then you've got Nicolas Cage, who is
he's a biochemist,
an expert. So he gets dragged in. You've got Michael Biehn, who's head of the Navy SEALs, the team that are going to go in and hopefully rescue the hostages. But what they're looking for really is intel, and the problem is with the Alcatraz, it's been built on so many times that they don't have proper maps or construction blueprints or anything. So they need somebody who, and supposedly no one's ever broken out of Alcatraz. And that basically puts pressure on the FBI director to reveal that there is one person who has broken out of Alcatraz, and as you say,
it's John Patrick Mason, SAS captain,
former SAS captain. He came to the US. He stole some of FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover's private files on microfilm, and he was captured and he was held without trial. And so the British Secret Service and the Americans came up to this compromise that he would be held anonymously, and he'd spent, I think, something like 40 years in prison.
Yeah, a large chunk of his life.
One of the stays he had on Alcatraz, which he actually escaped from. So he's initially brought in to just act as a consultant, brief the SEAL team. But he says, the map's in my head. I need to be on the ground. So he actually accompanies the SEAL team. The SEAL team are all killed, leaving Nick Cage's character, Sidney Goodspeed, and Sean Connery's character to basically defeat the Marines and rescue the hostages because there's an airstrike has been ordered on Alcatraz. So they have to do it all before that. And again,
I'll just sum it up. It's a Michael Bay film.
Yeah.
So it's, it follows the same tropes, but one, we like the cast and direction. Yeah. And two, we're suckers for big action blockbusters, aren't we?
It's one. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of action films, but it is one that is. It's just so out there that it's because it's got humour as well.
Yeah,
it's funny, but also it's got good action.
What I love as well is it knows what it's doing. It knows it's a huge bullshit.
It doesn't take itself too seriously, does it? Really. It cost 75 million to make, but it made 335 million at the box office. So that again just shows. I mean, you could have had another actor in that role, but I just don't think it would have, like you say, the gravitas that he would bring to that role.
Because he's also the front and centre on the film poster as well, isn't he?
Yeah. The next film is he made in '86 is The Avengers, and that is based on the 1960s British television series of the same name, and it starred Ralph Fiennes and Uma Thurman, and Sean Connery plays Sir August de Winter, who was actually the a mad scientist, and he was actually the antagonist in this film. So he was almost playing the kind of Blofeld character to a sort of James Bond style character. Unfortunately, it only grossed $55 million against a $60 million budget, and it was universally panned by critics.
Some consider it one of the worst films ever made.
Yeah.
So.
Personally, I haven't seen it, and I don't know. I can't really comment on his performance in it, because sometimes you can have a really good performance in a bad film.
Yeah.
So,
in my opinion, Connery, he wasn't the worst thing about this film.
No.
I just think it had a really, because I've been unfortunate to see this. Like I said, Connery's Connery. He's always going to give him a great performance, but one, the plot isn't believable at all. Two, the plot isn't very interesting. Like controlling the world's weather. Wow, so it's just not that good of a film.
Well, it's kind of all been done in James Bond, hasn't it, really?
And it's just another rehash of James Bond. Yeah. But yeah, it's not a very good film. I wouldn't recommend it.
Okay, moving on from that. His next film was the 1999 caper film, Entrapment, which he actually produced as well. And he plays an art thief, and he's being pursued by an insurance investigator played by Catherine Zeta-Jones. And she basically tries to entrap him, claiming that she's a professional art thief herself and proposing that they work together on their next heist. It's okay, but I mean, by this time he's getting on for like 69, 70. He's kind of trying to recapture that leading man status.
Yeah.
It just feels a bit creepy, him kind of flirting with Catherine Zeta-Jones and her being the kind of love interest in it. But again, although it was critically not very well received, it made a lot of money at the box office. From a $66 million budget, it made $212 million. So again, another blockbuster. And so the next film I'm going to talk about is his last film, the 2003 The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. It's based on it's a diesel punk superhero film, and it's loosely based on the first volume of the comic book series of the same name by Alan Moore and Kevin O'Neill. Sean Connery plays Alan Quatermain in it, and you've got other characters such as Captain Nemo, Dorian Gray, Tom Sawyer, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Professor Moriarty. Again, I think there were production problems.
Serious production problems.
It's one that Connery produced himself as well, and he did say that, didn't like the directing, tried to spend a lot of time trying to fix it in editing, but really couldn't save it. I mean, even though it wasn't a great film, it made $179 million from a $78 million budget. So I don't know if that was good. It opened number 2 behind Pirates of the Caribbean, Curse of the Black Pearl. But the critics, really did pan it, didn't like it at all. And I think that's what prompted him really to retire.
Just pack it up, yeah.
Yeah. Because he didn't really want to go through that experience again.
No.
And so it's really unfortunate. And like I said, he was offered the opportunity to be in the fourth Indiana Jones films, reprise his role as Henry Jones Sr., but he said, he was enjoying retirement so much and didn't really want to do it. So fair enough, I guess.
Yeah, but it's just a shame that he had 17 years of his life left, and he didn't make another movie. So
yeah, I mean, you look at people like Clint Eastwood who were still making films into the 90s. I mean, he could have if he wanted to. And sometimes, more interestingly than roles that they do accept, is the roles that they were offered and turned down. And allegedly he was offered the role of Gandalf in Lord of the Rings trilogy. He turned it down because he didn't want to spend 18 months filming in New Zealand. it's claimed he didn't really understand the novels. Again, it's he was supposedly offered $30 million up front and 15% of the profits, which would have made him $450 million. He was also offered the role of the architect in The Matrix, as well as the role of John Hammond in Jurassic Park. And it's also rumoured that Harrison Ford was offered the role of Dr. Alan Grant. But it's probably too close to Indiana Jones, I think, as a character, probably why he turned it down. And also, he was offered the role of Dumbledore in Harry Potter. So I can actually see him in some of those roles.
I could, yeah. Gandalf and Dumbledore.
Yeah, I think so. But again, they're sort of some roles you can't see other actors in.
Yeah.
But I think he would have maybe made.
It's like with John Hammond, like I can only see that as a Richard Attenborough thing, and same with Sam Neill with House of Orders.
Yeah, but it would have been interesting to have Lord of the Rings.
To be fair, like I said, it might be controversial, but I've watched them all, but they're not films. I understand how great they are, but they're not films we watch all the time. But I would go out seriously and watch it just because of Sean Connery if he was in it. But
and unfortunately, Sir Sean Connery died in his sleep on the 31st of October 2020, aged 90, in Nassau in the Bahamas. And I think you agree with me, he's sorely missed and probably, again, he isn't a classical actor, he's not a method actor, he's Sean Connery.
He just is the leading man, isn't he? And he just has that grace on screen that only Sean Connery can. Like you said, he's Sean Connery. There's no other words to describe it.
Definitely. Any final words?
Just to say that I'm glad that he decided to change from bodybuilder into an actor, because we wouldn't have got all these great films, and he is, in my opinion, one of the best to have come from the UK in a long list of classically trained actors, and it's like I said, he is the. When you talk about greatest leading man, he's probably the best leading man of all time. So,
he's certainly made a diverse type of film as well.
He's not just stuck to one.
And he has tried to stretch himself, I think, as an actor to try and get away from that action hero James Bond status.
But I really do. Of course, he'll always be known for Dr. No, but I really do think, in my opinion, that he's beat the typecast because he's done so many. Different genres, so many different films that you just can't typecast him, even though
I think in a way that other actors haven't been able to do.
Yeah.
So. Well, thank you for listening. Thank you, Cheeto, for joining me for this podcast.
I think next week we're going to do Ridley Scott, aren't we?
Yeah, we're going to do a sort of series of podcasts where we focus on a particular actor or a director, along with our usual general sort of podcasts. As always, where we have more content, we're on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. It's all the Film Geezers. So thank you for joining us and hope to see you next week.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.